Welcome to the Dr. Hockey Podcast. I'm Dr. Jay Calvert, and I am on today with my in-transit co-host, Dr. Jason Berkley. Jason, driving through the hippie hills of the Topanga Canyon. How are you doing, Jason?
Okay, I just has a horse. I'm riding a horse on Topanga. So yes,
We have on today
yes,
with
but
us
it's
from the
cool.
Hockey Writers, Jacob Billington. And Jacob, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate this.
Yeah, no, it's great. We're excited about it. As we're the Doctor Hockey Podcast, so we're always interested in things medical and things traumatic. And we watched the Senators beat the Maple Leafs the other night, which I'm sure was very satisfying to the Senators fans. Would you say?
Oh, the Battle of Ontario. It hasn't been very competitive lately, but it's always nice to beat the Toronto Maple Leafs regardless of the fashion. And now that there's kind of a little bit of a rivalry sparked back up, which I'm sure we'll get into very shortly. Yeah, a win is always great.
Yeah, I mean it was a decisive win, and of course we're interested as physicians. Jason is actually a pain doctor. He takes care of back pain and neck pain and does all kinds of painful surgeries. And I am of course a facial trauma guy too. I do a lot of noses and fix things in the face. So having a hit like the Morgan Rielly hit on Ridly Greig is of interest and why it occurred. So we'd like to hear it from your standpoint. And we all watched the tape. And just for our listeners who didn't know, it was an empty net goal at the end of the game. Ridly, is Ridly Greig, who's a rookie, correct? He's a young guy. He comes screaming down on an empty net and winds up, hits a full on slap shot into the net, and Morgan Rielly comes over and cross checks him to the head right after. Is that your recollection of it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's fair to say that Ridley Gregg might have crossed a bit of a line, but I disagree. And I was kind of on the side that yeah, maybe taking the slap shot was crossing a line, but somebody challenged me on that and said, "How is that crossing a line? There's no written rule about it. There's none of this." And somebody asked me if I would consider it showboating. I said no, I don't think so. That's just kind of putting the dagger in, and it was just kind of a rub it in your face, but without taking it too far. And then Morgan Rielly reacted pretty inappropriately given the situation, I would say.
That's
One of the funny things about hockey, as opposed to I think any other sport, there's such a giant list of these unwritten rules of things not to do, supposedly. And unfortunately, a lot of those things you're not supposed to do are fun for the fans.
what is the unwritten rule? Can you take that slap shot into the empty net? I've never seen that before, and I've been watching hockey since I was, 4 years old, and so I've never seen anybody take a slap shot into an empty net.
No, I haven't either, and it sparks the question of what is an unwritten rule? Can you break it, and should you? But it's more so just the fact that you're really taking the opportunity to rub that in, and just from some of the things that I took from while he was breaking up, asking a couple questions there, was Jake Wallman doing the gritty after scoring, and he's done that a couple times now. And it's just one of those things that it's like, are you
Yep.
taking it a little bit too far? I don't think so. I think it's fantastic for the game. And you look at people like John Tortorella, who is, I don't want to call him old because he's certainly not old, but he's, in terms of hockey, he's getting up there. He's part of the older generation. And he doesn't like it. He appreciates the fact that it is what it is now, and there's nothing he can do about it. But he's very vocal about it's just he likes the older style of the game where yes, you are going to get punched or cross checked in the face if you do something like what Ridly Greig did, which is totally fair. I completely understand that there is reason for a response, a physical response. That's why there's fighting in hockey. If Morgan Rielly drops his gloves and punches even an unsuspecting Ridly Greig in the face, maybe not like the Todd Bertuzzi level, but just gives him a nice punch in the face, glove on or off. We're not even talking about it today.
Yeah, I mean, I
Right.
think I give him credit for taking the slap shot. I mean, he was right there, and he's a rookie. I'm sure he was, probably caught in the moment. And here's an opportunity to, really drive the point home. Like, we beat you guys, and this is the end of the game. But I guess you do have to kind of expect it. It was, yeah. Sheldon Keefe said like he thought the response was appropriate.
I think a response was certainly appropriate. Morgan Rielly very clearly crossed the line. That's why he was given a 5-game suspension. And I do think that it's more than just rubbing in the fact that you won the game, more than rubbing in the fact that you just beat the Battle of Ontario, you won that game, whatever. But I can't remember the exact timestamp of it, but about 4 minutes prior to all this happening, Ridly Greig was in a net front battle, which happens umpteen dozen times a game. But he was with Jake McCabe, and a cross check to the back. It looked like it rode up his back and maybe hit him in the neck or the back of the head. Nothing egregious, nothing dangerous. It was just typical cross check, just went a little bit high. You could call Jake McCabe on the cross check. You probably even could have called offsetting minors there just for the two of them going at it. But Ridly Greig goes down. It looked like he was hurt for a second. He got up, skated to the bench. His next shift out, he gets the empty net breakaway, and he decides to just put the seal on it. And I think that it was more so like, in my opinion, it was a personal vendetta against Jake McCabe. And just saying, like, see, you tried your best to get me out of the way, and look at me. I'm scoring a goal to end the game.
Right. I agree with that.
Yeah, it was pretty satisfying. Yeah. I liked it. I said, I don't know why people don't do that more often. And you know what? Fine. So you got to take a little bit of a bump, but like that, take your licks, man. You lost the game. It's over, and that's it. There's no crying in hockey, so too bad. And then if you got to take a punch to the face or whatever, that's fine. But I think the cross check to the head is a problem. And, if anybody has any questions about that, the way that we see those kind of cross checks is there are moments of like life-threatening danger for these players. Helmet or no helmet, when you take that stick and you have it in two hands with a guy that bench presses 250 or 280 pounds, and he whacks you through the head, you got issues with neck fractures, concussions, depressed skull fractures. I don't, facial injuries,
nerve damage. Yep.
I don't care who you are. That is not a good way to treat your fellow players. No matter how upset you guys are, it just doesn't. You can't do that. It is a very dangerous move.
I think that the NHL is working on cracking down on the headshots, just trying to have that zero tolerance policy. They're just not quite there yet. I think 5 in a vacuum, 5 games is not enough for what Morgan Rielly did. Looking in context of the NHL, and not that the NHL does a very good job following precedents, but any precedent set is that pretty much anything you do, you're not going to get more than 5 or 6 games, like at the very, very most. You could be like Raffi Torres, who got quite a lengthy suspension, but he was a repeat offender, and he really crossed the line with his hit. Or Shane Pinto with the gambling, the alleged, I don't even know what the whole situation was still, but he served 41 games. But for an on-ice incident, you're not typically going to see anything more. Like 5-game suspension for Morgan Rielly is a very long suspension in the NHL. Oh. And yes, he's forfeiting $200,000. That is a good chunk of money, but think of what would happen if Ridly Greig's career was over after a hit like that. Like you said, with all these medical things that could have happened. Thank goodness that they didn't. But it's not like it's impossible for any of these things to happen and have long-term effects on his health.
I don't disagree, but here's the thing, though. The player safety is the most inconsistent factor in the entire sport. The other couple weeks ago, when Dylan Larkin got knocked unconscious on the ice, but Johnson, I think it was, and David Perron came in over to defend him. Perron got 6 games. Johnson didn't get a suspension at all for a hit to the back of the head and knocked the guy out flat on the ice unconscious. So, the problem is they tend to wax and wane. They don't really, if they were consistent, and like you said, that hit by Morgan Rielly should have warranted, in my opinion, a lot longer suspension. 15 games. If you have that precedent, guys will be less inclined to do that than they would, like you said, drop the gloves, give them a tap to the jaw, and whatever. I think that, and the fact that they've tried to eliminate fighting, has enabled some of these players that otherwise would normally never take a hit like that. They don't even think twice about it now. That's the problem. The lack of consistency and true actual punishment for those devastating, dangerous hits.
Yeah, and you look at the fact that so there's an appeal right now that Morgan Rielly is going through, and I assume by the time a verdict is made, the 5 games is going to be up, and this is more so about the forfeited money than the actual length of the suspension. But
Right.
when you look at these appeals, you got to think. So the NHL player, the union, the NHLPA, they are saying Morgan Rielly should not be suspended this long because the precedent that you set is that this is a 1 or 2 game suspension, excluding the David Perron suspension, which is the most recent example. But there has been
Right.
the exact same play has gotten 1 and 2 games in
Right.
multiple times in the past 3 years. So the PA
Yeah.
is going and saying, listen, he does not deserve this many games, but this is why, and here's the precedent that you set and whatnot. What about Ridly Greig? Like, what if he was injured? And what's the PA going to do for
Yeah.
him? Nothing, because he's not losing any money. He's getting paid
Right.
by insurance. So the PA is only going to defend you if you are the one forfeiting money, not if you are the one that is dealing with the injury. And that's where I have a problem in the NHL, or at least with
Agreed.
the appeal process, is that the PA does not stand up for. I don't think he would call himself a victim here, but the one that is receiving the hit that is worthy of punishment, the victim, the one on the other end of it, they're
Yep.
not standing up for him. They're saying, listen, you're getting this suspension, and we're going to try and lower it because he needs to get paid his money. That's one of the biggest problems that I have with the PA. That and set a precedent and stick to it.
Yep.
Jacob, since you're on with us from Hockey Writers, can you give our listeners where all your social media and Twitter so that they can follow you and figure out what where all your good stuff is?
Yeah, absolutely. So all my writing is at thehockeywriters.com. I write for the Ottawa Senators, a little bit for the PWHL Ottawa. And on Twitter, you can find me at Jacob Billington. So yeah, I tweet all about the games, all about hockey, not just the Ottawa Senators. I consider myself more of a hockey fan than a team fan, although if I did have to pick a team, you can see which one I would choose. But yeah, so that's where you can find me.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean that's these kind of moments for a team like the Senators, this obviously this year is not, their banner year, and playoffs aren't in the future for them, but that's a strong moment. It does spark the rivalry a bit, and I think the Senators have, they've got a lot of, bright spots, coming up, and just it doesn't take much for these teams to go from like not in playoff contention to, the next year to be in playoff contention, as we've seen with many teams over and over the years. And, I even think of like the Seattle Kraken in their, inaugural couple of years, no, they're nowhere, and then they're in the playoffs all of a sudden. So that can happen. And certainly the Senators have a lot of bright spots. What do you see in terms of their next year? What do they need to do to get there, to get themselves off the ground into the playoff picture?
Well, I think it all starts right now. So Jacques Martin has come in. He struggled for his first 10, 11 games. Well, sorry, the team struggled underneath Jacques Martin for the first 10 or 11. And in the last 13, they've been doing fantastic. So right now they're on a 7-1-2 record in their last 10 games. Everything about their play has gotten significantly better, from bottom 5 in the team to top 10 in the league, except for the power play, which, as we saw last year, Ottawa is more than capable of having one of the best power plays in the NHL. So that'll just come with time, I think. And right now, I think it's going to start next season. How they do is going to start this year at the trade deadline. So you look at Vladimir Tarasenko, he's a pending unrestricted free agent. Makes total sense to move on from him. But I think the best move, even if there's still a chance that you might lose him for nothing in the offseason, is to keep Vladimir Tarasenko. Because right now, Ottawa can't afford to buy into the losing mentality. They need to develop that winning culture, even if it ends up costing them a 28th overall draft pick for Vladimir Tarasenko. They just need to develop that winning culture. And Jacques Martin is getting this team ready to be coached, right? So he's not the long-term man behind the bench. Steve Staios was pretty clear about that in a mid-season press conference, but he just needs to. What he's doing right now is teaching this team how to be coached in the NHL. Most of these players only know DJ Smith hockey. That was not. It was good for the rebuild, good to develop the guys. He didn't know how to win hockey games as a head coach, and I mean, as an assistant coach, he's struggling in LA right now too. But Jacques Martin is getting this team ready to be coached by an NHL caliber coach. And that's the key to success for moving forward.
I will say the loss of DeBrincat hit them harder than they thought. When Kubalik came to the Senators, they kept thinking he was going to be the magic, guy to come in, and he actually played pretty well for the Red Wings, and and had some good spurts of goal production and offensive production. But boy, the Senators fans have been vicious to us nonstop online, like I've never seen. Even with the Hawks fans, it makes them look like they're in romper room. I can understand the frustration in Ottawa right now, especially after losing an all-star guy like that. But what else do you think they really have to do other than Tarasenko? I mean, do they move on from Giroux? I mean, do they have to do anything else they could do to kind of get themselves out of where the position they are from a specific position that you see in particular? Like, what are the top three needs that Ottawa has?
Well, I would say that right now, so as we're recording this, I believe that they're bottom 6 in the NHL. They need to be buyers this year. They need to get a right-handed defenseman. They need to acquire Chris Tanev, or they need to acquire Sean Walker, Matt Roy, one of these guys that are going to really solidify that top 4. And do they come with an extension right away? Does that get figured out after the season? I don't know. But that would be number 1, is to buy on a right-handed defenseman. Number 2 would be, again, I would say keep Tarasenko. I think he needs to be I think he needs to stick around to keep developing that winning culture. And number 2 is to clear out some cap space. And for me right now, that's going to be to move on from both Dominic Kubalik, who you mentioned, who is his goal pace isn't much lower than any of his most recent years. It's just he doesn't add anything to this lineup that Ottawa doesn't already have. There's no place for him. And Eric Brandstrom, I think I'm an Eric Brandstrom fan, but he doesn't fit on this roster. Same as Kubalik, really. His skill set is not built for a shutdown role on the third pair. He does have good defensive metrics, but he could thrive much better if he had more of an opportunity. And there's a huge left-sided defenseman logjam with the Senators already. Even if they move on from him and want to keep one of their top 3 left-handed defensemen on the right side, they still have Tyler Clevin to come up. So there's a lot of options on defense, and they still need to add one and trade one. So that would be my top 3 moves to be making right now.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean they've got a good base, and they definitely have the talent. And I think Jacques Martin was a very smart move. I thought that was it makes sense, and it's a good little way to get them out of the funk of what had been going on for them, and because it's they're not missing the talent, they have not pulled it together. It's tough to watch Brady Tkachuk too, because he's awesome. He's such a fun player, and I'm sure he'd like to be getting to the playoffs and doing what he can do.
Yeah, it'll be a really exciting day that we see Brady Tkachuk in the playoffs. And I mean, you look at Matthew Tkachuk, yeah, he had a lot of regular season success, but he wasn't even considered one of the best players in the NHL until last year when he just went off in the playoffs. And I think Brady Tkachuk is capable of something very similar to that. I think Matthew Tkachuk is the better player, but I think I would prefer to have Brady Tkachuk just because he has more physicality and whatnot. More of a pest than Matthew Tkachuk, which is hard to do. But the offensive upside is better for Matthew Tkachuk, but they're pretty even value-wise. And I'm really excited to see Brady Tkachuk in the playoffs and put this team on his back.
Yeah, Brady's a beast. The guy is just he's strong, and he's spirited. He's got huge fire. He plays with a massive chip on his shoulder the whole time, and he does not take any guff on any side.
He does have a little genetics on his side for that role, for that part of it.
Totally. I mean, his dad was amazing.
Yes, he was. He was also very tough to play against, as you could tell watching those old games of him.
There is one thing that I kind of wanted to bring up now that you kind of mentioned Keith and Matthew. I saw a tweet today online that said that Brady is a Nepo baby, and that he's overhyped because of his last name. And I think that that's ridiculous. And I think it's just because he hasn't made the playoffs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, he's the real deal, man. That guy's legit.
sports is the one place in our society where you cannot be a Nepo baby. You just can't. You got to have the talent to be there. And, or if you don't, you're gone. I don't care what your last name is. Even if it's Gretzky, if you're not a good player, you're gone. So they can maybe make that case if they want for attention and how they are maybe off the ice or whatever it is or something. But there's no way in any sport that you're going to be a Nepo baby and then still stick around.
100%.
That I agree with you. That's an absurd statement.
Yeah.
Well, let's circle back a little bit to this the Morgan Rielly situation. So he's out for 5. That obviously is going to hurt the Leafs. That's not popular, I'm sure, amongst his teammates and the coaching staff on the Maple Leafs. Do you think that anything will come of the appeal?
He's going to serve his 5 games. I don't think a verdict will come until after the appeal. So he might get some money back from it, but I don't think that that's going to change anything. And you mentioned that you don't think it's going to be popular with the coaching staff or the players. I think that it's going to be very popular. I think that everybody's going to be a huge fan of what Morgan Rielly did because everybody is so used to calling the Maple Leafs soft. They're not going to stand up for themselves. They're not going to do anything. And Morgan Rielly just kind of said, screw you, I'm going to do it myself then. We don't need Ryan Reeves to do this, or Tyler Bertuzzi has that grit in him. So does Max Domi. Morgan Rielly just kind of took over Michael Bunting's role as of right now, and just kind of said, listen, I'm going to stand up for our team. We're not going to allow this to happen. Obviously, as somebody who covers and follows the Ottawa Senators, I don't like to agree with anybody from Maple Leafs Nation, but I really like what Morgan Rielly did. He crossed the line, absolutely. But I think that that's a line almost worth crossing for him. He leaves a pretty big hole on the defensive group there, and I really don't like the look of the Maple Leafs roster this year. But somebody needed to stand up, and Morgan Rielly's kind of a perfect guy to do that because he's been around. He's been part of this team that for the last 7-8 years has been called soft and can't stand up for themselves. So he finally said, listen, let me do it. I got to stand up for our team. We're not going to allow this to happen, because if he doesn't do that, just think of how many people are calling that team soft and that they're going to allow this stuff to happen. So I think that his hand was kind of forced there. Maybe not to that extent to do a cross-check to the face, but his hand was forced to have some sort of response, and I absolutely respect that. And I think that it was the best thing for him to do was to have a physical response. He just crossed the line with it.
Yeah, and unfortunately, look, I have an affinity for the Leafs on some level. I have a lot of my family's from there. My dad's family's all Canadian, all from Toronto. But it's giving me another first-round exit for them. They could do all they want with these cross-checks and all that. If they get to the playoffs, which they probably will, it's another first-round bounce. There's just no way that this team has anything really in it. I just don't see that. And they can do whatever they want, sign all these players for the multi-millions and all that. It's just not adding up to their success. And I think that probably the Morgan Rielly thing was like that frustration of all that ineptness, not just a slap on the goal. I think that was just like the final straw. But it's like, and I'm not sure if you've seen the Twitter account or X account, whatever it is now, about the Maple Leafs, and they always keep track of the exact number of days since they won a cup, since they lost to an AHL goalie, and they list other things on there, and it's actually a very funny parody account. So, yeah. They just don't have it, and that's as simple as that.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of that Twitter account, and they always post like the most obscure things. So like, yeah, they have the Zamboni driver, but their most recent one was like 4 days since you let Ridly Greig score an empty net goal, slap shot. So yeah, I think it's
exactly. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's tough. I can only imagine what it's like to play in that city, and it's just got to be rough for those players. It's hard. I mean, they got to be sitting there thinking to themselves, what is it that we have to do other than assemble this all-star team of players to get somewhere in this cup chase? And it's just it's hard to watch. I mean, I got to say, it's like cringeworthy from we're watching from south of the border here, and it's tough. It must be hard up in Toronto.
Oh, well, if you look at the standings right now, they're only 4 points ahead of the Devils and 5 points ahead of the Islanders, who are two teams that going to make a strong push. Like they're not comfortably in a playoff spot.
No.
So I have no doubt that Toronto is going to make the playoffs this year. I think that it is a playoff caliber team, but I don't look at this team and think they can make any noise. Maybe Joseph Woll can change my mind when he comes back a little bit, but as of right now, there's nothing on this team other than, I mean, even Marner, he's had a good season, but he hasn't been like $11 million good.
Nope.
But right now, Nylander, who actually Nylander as well has slowed down quite a bit since signing his extension. But other than Matthews, there's no real threat on that team tonight. Like I look at that lineup and I'm like,
Yeah.
Matthews is the only one I'm worried about tonight, February 15th. So
Yeah.
I do, Jacob. I do want to ask you one more quick question before we let you go.
absolutely.
Obviously, as you know, there's been a big situation in Columbus with Patrik Laine, and I believe he's had to take a leave of absence. And you know, you always find it. We tend to forget some of these guys are humans, and they have personal issues and things. And obviously, we wish him the best in whatever struggles he's dealing with. You know, and then he gets called out by one of the podcasters, and you know, they made jokes about this stuff. And he even, you know, Laine's kind of a very, very subdued guy. I never got the impression he likes to kind of mix it up with people online, but he commented on that. And, you know, I feel really bad for the guy. What's your take on what happened, and also how you've, as a hockey writer, because, you know, we're just two doctors, we're fans of the game. You know, we have a different perspective than you do as a writer, but what's your perspective and take on what's going on with Laine and kind of the flack for whatever reason he's received, which I don't understand, and it's, I think, very unfounded.
So I think as hockey fans, hockey, not so much the media because they're so close, if you have like credentials to go into the arena and whatnot, but for even somebody, so I am kind of remote. I live in Nova Scotia covering the Senators. So I'm not going to the games and meeting with the team members and the coaching staff and whatnot. But as people that are away from the game and not up close to the people, they get dehumanized very quickly. And so people don't think of them as the people. They think of them as the person that they're betting on the over on 2.5 shots, or I'm betting that you're going to get a point tonight, or I hope you score a goal so my team does well. Right? It's not, oh, I hope you have a good night and go home safe to your wife and kid, or
Yes.
I hope that your mom is doing okay. Like, people don't care about them as people when they're that far away from the game. And I don't know any of the people on the podcast. I do know that one of them, Elaine, the only one on the podcast that didn't laugh and that she didn't understand the joke. She did used to also write for the Hockey Writers. And I have heard some great things about her. So it's really unfortunate that she got kind of dragged into this.
She quit though, but she quit.
She did. She left the podcast after that and said, I'm done. But I just think people need to be careful with what they say online, and this goes for crossing the line with something like the jokes that they made, or crossing the line with pretty much anything now, because as a society we have become much more progressive, and people call it soft, but people are just becoming more sensitive to other people and realizing that the world is not all about you. And I think that it's really tough to, like, even so for myself, I wrote a piece last year, and I said my goal was to convey that I don't think that DJ Smith should be coaching the Ottawa Senators anymore. And I wrote and I said, listen, I know that the odds of DJ Smith reading my article is not going to be very high, but how do I be respectful about this? How do I word this? And I went to the editing manager of the Hockey Writers, and I said, listen, I'm writing it like this. I just want you to kind of approve this. And yes, it goes through a bunch of editing processes before it gets published.
Right.
But I just wanted to be kind of personal about it. And I said, listen, I just want to make sure that like it doesn't sound like I'm being a jerk here or like targeting DJ Smith. I just think that the Senators are better off without DJ Smith. And so how do I write this more respectfully? And he told me he was really happy that I was kind of considering
just
it
what you
that way.
said though, but just what you said was fine. I mean, there's nothing wrong with brutal honesty, but when you make it personal, I think, with the players or people in general, and you know, the whole thing that happened with Corey Perry and the whole rumor mill and all that stuff, I mean, that was just a complete debacle. And if they had just come out and said what happened, what the issue was, and diffused it, I think it would have quelled a lot of these things. So look, Yes, I understand what you're saying about people being sensitive these days, and people are maybe to a fault sometimes. But I think that social media has fueled so much of this, and there's such anonymity on there that people can just say whatever they want without any type of consequences. Even when it's themselves that has the account, there's no consequences. But I think that there's, like you said, they've lost that perspective of it's a person there. And if he's struggling with issues, because I think we all have at some point in our life, why not just sit back and say, look, I wish the dude the best. I hope he's someone that can, get his life to a point where he's happy or whatever's going on with him. And I think that's kind of just leave it at that. And you wish him the best as a person.
Yeah.
And
you
I
look
don't
at
see anything beyond that. That should be an issue. That's
Yeah,
okay. That's where I think it begins and ends, like leave it at that.
absolutely. And you look at the point that they were trying to make on the podcast. I only watched the clip once, so I'm just kind of paraphrasing here. But they were talking about
Yeah.
how all these injuries and all of X, Y, and Z is what is costing this team these losses and why they're not as good as they are. And then when they brought up Patrik Laine, they obviously made the very inappropriate joke. But all you got to say is, and Laine is out because he's dealing with some mental health issues, and move on from that. Like, you don't have to make a joke. You don't have to be
Right.
like, that's
Right.
just not something to joke about, especially in today's age where we just went through a pandemic where the mental health crisis is as peaked as it ever has been. Like,
Out of control.
yeah, it's
Right.
mental health crisis is like, we are living it right now, and people that can be sensitive or insensitive to it can have their own opinions, but it's just a fact right now that more people are dealing with mental health issues than ever before in history, and we need to be more accepting of that because everybody deals with it, whether you think you do or not. Everybody has dealt with some sort of mental health issue, regardless of if you
Sure.
pushed it off or not.
And I think it's just as much of an injury as, knee sprain or puck to the hip or something or whatever else. It should be treated the same way. Look, he's out with personal issues. Okay, leave it at that, and move on. But you wish him the best, and as you would for anything else. And he's a phenomenal player. I happen to think he's in the wrong team and he's in the wrong situation for him.
Yeah.
And I hope that when he comes back, maybe he does make a change in his life and goes with a better team that will probably appreciate his talents more and use him better. But having said that, you just wish the guy the best, and that's it. Just like when Bobby, why am I blanking on when he came back to the Wings? Bobby, he was on the Ducks with
Bobby Ryan.
Bobby Ryan, yeah. When Bobby Ryan came back, and everybody knew he had a drinking problem and all that and everything else, and all you could do is, even if you weren't a Wings fan or a Ducks fan or whatever, you root for the guy in life. That's usually also typically what separates hockey from most other sports. There's that personal touch with it, and you want these guys to do well on the ice, but also sometimes more so off the ice. And that's how I look at it. So
yeah, so you can look at a lot of players, and obviously you want to find any way to connect with your favorite player in the NHL. You look up to him, he's your role model, whatever it might be. But I have two questions for the two of you. One, do you appreciate it when the NHL, so I'll use Tomas Hertl. Yesterday, I don't know if you two saw, yesterday he kind of came out and said, this is exactly what my injury is, and this is kind of the procedure that I'm going to have, and it's going to take a minimum of several weeks to heal. And so, especially as doctors, I'm sure that you appreciate when there's that much transparency and you understand exactly what's going on, especially because you can relate to that.
Yes.
Am I fair in saying that?
Yes, I wish they would do that a lot more than say upper body or lower body injury. It's so frustrating because then everyone's asking me what. I agree with you. Yeah, no, I didn't see the article about it. I'm going to go read about it after we're done with this, but I appreciate that type of clarity a lot more.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I believe he had loose cartilage in his knee, and he's getting that removed. They said it's not going to make anything any worse. You can play on it, but it'll be uncomfortable. And so after the All-Star break, he decided that, listen, I think now's a good time to do this. So that's kind of the situation there. I think that's great to see that much clarity. But at the same time, and I'm not accusing either of you or anything, I'm on the same page as you. I like it when there's this much transparency, but why is it any of our business? Like, we're not paying for these players. We're not. We pay to see them play, but we're not paying their salary directly. It's not our business. So why is it our business to know that a player has gone into the substance abuse program, or that Patrik Laine is dealing with mental health issues in the players' assistance program? That's not our business, I don't think. And so one of the managers at the Hockey Writers, we just kind of had a conversation about this not long ago, and I said, why is the NHL not being more transparent about this? And he asked me the same question. He said, why is it any of our business? And I said, you know what? Thanks for asking that, because I don't think it is. I really like knowing, because I'm a fan of the sport and I'm a fan of all the players, but why is it any of my business? And that's just, I don't have an answer for that. I'm not saying that it's wrong for you to want to know, but
I think the difference is, personally, and Jay, I'm curious about what you say. I think the difference is, if somebody's out for personal issues, just leave it at that. There's nothing needs to be more said than that. If it's a personal problem, personal issue, you leave it at that and move on. I think, however, though, when there's an injury that's occurred within the realm of the game, an ankle, a shoulder, a hip, that does affect the player's return in that regard, I have no problem with them revealing more than just saying upper body, lower body, or whatever else. I remember when we had Seth Jones on a couple years ago, and he had broken his leg, and he was telling us how long it took to heal, but that he was going to come back sooner if he needed to for the playoffs and that sort of thing. And I thought that was pretty bold of him to say that. So I think there's the defining line, or the line in the sand for me with that is, if it's a personal or mental health issue, whatever that, you leave it at that and don't even say specifically. If it's a sports related injury that affects the game or the team's outcome, I think that's not fair game in the sense of, like, let the player discuss it, not someone else.
Right. And I think the pressure should be off the NHL to be disclosing this, and even off the teams. And it should only, not that there should be any pressure, but it should be up to Seth Jones to kind of disclose about his leg injury. Yes. Right.
Right.
And so, like, it doesn't change anything for me to know that Patrick Kane just had a hip resurfacing. But I appreciate knowing that, because now I can kind of look and say, all right, well, these other players have done the hip resurfacing surgery, and it's nice to see that he's doing better than they did on their return. Or like Jack Eichel with the fusion in his neck. I love knowing that. I think it's extremely interesting.
Disc replacement.
Oh, did he get the replacement?
It's a disc replacement. Yeah,
yes,
that's what
the Sabres wanted to do the fusion.
Yes, correct.
Yes. So
we talked about that on a past episode too. We discussed, because I do spine. I'm a spine specialist, so all the injections and everything. So we discussed the whole thing about the disc replacement and all that. But yes, again, it kind of is a bit of, Jay, would you agree, sometimes a HIPAA violation, I guess, if you're looking at it from a technical aspect. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. You should not be, that information is personal, private information. It is not for public consumption. It should not be out there. And I bet there will come a day when that gets challenged in a legal situation.
But I do like the fact, though, that if the patient/player opens up, like you said, Hurdle did, and says, this is what I have, this is what's going to happen, I actually appreciate that. I like knowing that, and I actually respect them doing that. But again, it's not something that I would ever want or expect or necessarily need to hear from a Patrik Laine or a Bobby Ryan or anybody else about their personal issues. That's where I draw the line. And I wish these guys the best. I wish him the best, but and I wish Hurdle about the surgery. But again, there's a difference between those two, I think.
Yeah, so. And I agree. I'm not disagreeing with you. I just kind of wanted to pose that question to you guys.
It's a good question. Yeah.
And
it's really important information, because those injuries do get sort of, and then everybody's got their opinion about what that means. Well, what does it mean that he's having this or that? Like, they don't know. I mean, you probably aren't even getting the full story. That's for sure, because there's nuance to all of these injuries and these treatment plans, and then it also depends on who the medical group is that's taking care of them. They all have a different attitude and approach to taking care of things. It's going to be different. That same injury is going to be different on every team, given a different set of orthopedic surgeons and physical therapists.
Right. Correct.
Well, Jacob, listen, we really appreciate you coming on with us. This was awesome. You know, we're hoping that the Senators do something for you over the next couple seasons here. We'll be following along and hopefully get you back on to talk more about some success. But appreciate you taking time to go over this the situation with the Leafs. Obviously, we all enjoyed the slap shot, so we'll take it.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you guys having me on, and I'm really interested in kind of your side of the perspective rather than just a traditional fan. Like the way that you look at things, there's a couple there's a couple doctor hockey fans that I follow on Twitter, and just as soon as a clip happens, they retweet it and say, "Hey, it looks like he might have a displaced shoulder, or it could be a
Yeah.
neck injury on this hit." I just think it's really interesting. And again, whether that's my business or not, I don't know. But the kind of speculation from an informed opinion, I appreciate seeing that. So I really appreciate what you guys do and kind of your perspective of things. And I think it's awesome.
Well, thanks.
Oh,
We're always,
thanks.
if you ever have questions about any of that stuff, always, shoot it down to us. We're not the experts in orthopedic surgery, but we certainly deal with a lot of injuries on both of our specialties. So it's kind of in our, and obviously we're huge hockey physiology people. We love it. It's kind of cool. All right, sir. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and hopefully we will speak to you again very soon. Jacob Billington.